I own a lot of Nigerian novels, as it turns out. I didn't realize I owned so many. Um, but I looked at my bookshelf and it turns out that like every single African novel that I own is Nigerian, which good for Nigeria. You know, that's a cultural victory you don't see very often. Before we begin, I do think that it is important that we should discuss content warning. We're going to be discussing Purple Hibiscus. Purple Hibiscus is about domestic violence, specifically child abuse. So if that's an issue for you, I'm not going to talk about it right away. So, you know, I'm going to talk about retellings of stories first. But when we get to the actual discussion on domestic violence, I will give another warning. But just a heads up. And if you are planning on reading this book, you should know that it is about child abuse, and it is very graphic. So, Purple Hibiscus is the first novel by the, as already noted, Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I'm like 95% sure on that pronunciation for her name. If I get it wrong, I'm very sorry. She'll never listen to this. But I'm pretty sure I'm right. I listened to her pronounce it, so hopefully I'm right. But what's interesting about this novel is that it is effectively a retelling of the other book, Nigerian novel, Things Fall Apart, which, you know, serendipitously, we've already read. I have a video on it. I'll put a link to the video on it. So that's really fun, really convenient. Things Fall Apart is probably the most famous African novel, let alone Nigerian novel. Adichie, as a Nigerian author, would have been acutely aware of Achebe. That wasn't on screen, of Achebe and his influence on African art, and so I think that the balls on Adichie to take on the most famous African novel in her first novel. Uh, so in that video on Things Fall Apart, on the off chance that you haven't watched it or you don't watch it, I discussed Okonkwo, the main character of Things Fall Apart, and his issues with masculinity in a pre-colonial Nigeria and as it became colonized by the British. And one of the things I talked about was how toxic the masculinity of Okonkwo was. How he brutally repressed his own emotions and in the process brutally repressed the people around him, including his wives and children and neighbors. Adichie also noticed that, and because of that, Purple Hibiscus is more or less the same story, just written instead of from Okonkwo's perspective, from his daughter's perspective, or at least it is. I should say it's a modern retelling because Okonkwo is long past. This is a modern novel that takes place, I think, in the 90s. It doesn't specify, and again, I don't really know Nigerian history well enough to pinpoint exact spots. So it's really windy outside. I'm gonna have to close that window, which is not good because it's also really hot in my room. But this is the story of Kambili and her living with an Okonkwo-like figure, specifically her father, Eugene, and, you know, kind of the trials and tribulations of living with somebody like that. Somebody who is abusive, who, but at the same time, is also still considered a great man by his neighbors and his fellow countrymen. And that's what I want to get into first, is that similarities to Purple Hibiscus. or the similarities Purple Hibiscus has to Things Fall Apart. That's what I wanted to say. But first, I'm going to close the window. Hi. So, this is Editing Steven here. I realized that I forgot to include the plot when I originally recorded. So, I'm just going to read it out real fast for you so that you guys aren't lost when I'm talking about these characters, because that's very important. Spoilers, by the way. The novel follows Kambili and her brother Jaja, both school children in their teens. Their father, Eugene, although normally referred to as Papa, is a factory owner and pro-democracy newspaper editor, as well as a devout Catholic. Eugene is shown to be a domineering and exacting figure with regards to his family, often punishing them, and it is heavily implied that he is physically abusive, although outside the family he is met with near universal praise for his charity work and his bravery in standing up against the military dictatorship that has overthrown the Nigerian government. Eugene's sister, Auntie Ifeoma, invites the two children to visit her over the summer vacation, and eventually Eugene allows them to go. Once there, Kambili and Jaja find their newfound freedom intoxicating, and with the help of their aunt and cousins, they begin to grow and mature. Father Amadi, a priest and friend of their aunt's, acts as a surrogate father figure to Kambili and helps her to overcome the religious trauma that her father has inflicted upon her. But the visit comes to an end, and they have to return home. Once home, Jaja, with a new masculine sense that he ought to stand up to his father, begins to do so, to disastrous effect, as Eugene becomes even more abusive, eventually beating Kambili so bad that she has to recover for several weeks in the hospital. Eugene continues his abuse, causing his wife to miscarriage and flee with her children to Ifeoma's house, but out of nowhere she returns with her children to Eugene, where it is revealed that she has been slowly poisoning him until he dies at the end of the novel. So, as I said, Purple Hibiscus begins with things started to fall apart at home, and again makes clear that it is a reference to Things Fall Apart. But as a retelling of that novel, we might have the knee-jerk reaction to say that, oh, it's just a retelling. It's not important. It doesn't have a value. And that would be fair. Most people's experiences with retelling of novels is that tends to be through movies, and I'm gonna be honest, there's a lot of bad movie adaptations of books, and so I think it's very easy to be like originality equals good, and a retelling is bad, and that would be a mistake, however, because retellings, well, first off, a retelling doesn't have to not be original. It could be very original. What we look for in a retelling is what it adds to the story. See, the original story obviously exists, and we need to have read that original story to understand it, which again leads to what timing to have had read Things Fall Apart before we read Purple Hibiscus. That's very, very again, serendipitous. I like that word. So, as a few examples of other retellings that we can look to, you can see a wide variety of books. Things like James Joyce's Ulysses being a retelling of the Odyssey. The 2024 National Book Award winner and Booker Prize finalist James by Percival Everett is a retelling of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. 1996's Bridget Jones's Diary, which, while still genre fiction, and a lot of people would look down upon it, although they shouldn't, it has its place. But Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice. There are many different things like this, retellings that we can look to and see that actually they often do have literary merit. And I just think it's worth not having that knee jerk that instant reaction of being like, oh, it's not original, we don't have to take care of it, or we don't have to care about what they have to say. And that is not a way to go through, to go through our reading lives. We have to judge each thing on its basis. But we have to look at the original story, and we see our complaints. I had complaints. Adichie clearly had complaints. And we see these complaints, we think, well, how can we tell a more complete story? How can we change the original in order to tell a different story? Not necessarily a better story, but certainly a different one. And this Adichie is able to do by changing the perspective, by changing the point of view character. So in Things Fall Apart, we have the perspective of the strong Nigerian man who cannot come to terms with the society around him, but is nonetheless a tragic figure. Purple Hibiscus, however, says, despite him being a tragic figure, he was still a horrible person to his family, and thus she gives us the point of view of that family, specifically through the lens of the daughter. In Things Fall Apart, it's Zinma, and in Purple Hibiscus, we have Kambili. So why does changing the point of view matter? Well, aside from the fact that we can see that Adichie is playing off of Things Fall Apart, we also note that Okonkwo is seen as a great man, not just within the confines of the book, but also within the mythologizing of the book in our actual society. Okonkwo is often seen as this tragic figure of a man's man within a pre-colonial Africa, as a sort of a mythologization of what African men and black men in general can look forward to. So when she is poking a hole into that bubble, she isn't just poking a hole at Achebe. She's poking a hole at the entire concept of Okonkwo, the entire concept of that pre-colonial manly man aesthetic and everything. That's why it's important that she changes the point of view. That's why it's important that we note that she changes the point of view, because we are seeing a completely different side, a much more negative side of this kind of idealization. And we can see that it's not really an idealization, especially for the women and the sons of this, I don't know, man, I guess. This kind of like idealized man. Plot for plot, or beat for beat, I should say, the plots are very similar. We see in the beginning we have the sort of the before times where we see the characters, we meet the characters, and we're kind of aware that something's a little off, but it's not a big deal. Then we have Kambili go away from her parents, from her father, and see a different world, see a different light, in much the same way that Okonkwo went to his mother's village when he had to flee his own. And then we see the return, and we see that things have changed drastically. And not just within the household, but in Nigeria as a whole. There's a lot of political instability happening around in the story. And we see that play out as Eugene in the novel is unable to come to grips with things. The big difference, however, is the fate of the Okonkwo character. Now, in Things Fall Apart, he kills himself. Whereas in Purple Hibiscus, he is actually murdered by his wife. He's poisoned by his wife, which I think goes even further to say into a more feminist retelling of the story, to give more and we have to ask ourselves, has Nigeria not just changed from a pre-colonial into a colonial Nigeria, but this is now a modern Nigeria. We can see that Nigeria itself has changed, because now it's no longer that manly man's world. Now now women and children are to be taken into account, because they have their own say in how things go down within the household. Even so, even when that household is so oppressive as the household in Purple Hibiscus. The biggest change, however, is the inclusion of a new character. The character of Father Amadi. Now, Father Amadi does not have a similar character in Things Fall Apart, and is, I believe, the only main character, the only real character. There's Auntie Ifeoma, I suppose, but Auntie Ifeoma has a comparative persona in Things Fall Apart. At least a presumed character. She's never mentioned, I believe, by name in Things Fall Apart, but we are aware that there are aunts and uncles in Okonkwo's mother's village, but even though we never know them. But Father Amadi never existed at all, and this is the character that is added, and we have to ask ourselves, well, why add this character? And the reason is because Father Amadi gives us a new view on masculinity. So while Adichie is rejecting the old view, the Okonkwo's of the world, she provides us with this new version of masculinity. A masculinity which is self-assured but not overbearing, which is kind and loving but not destructive. And I did see online, and I do think it's worth noting, because Father Amadi is a Catholic priest, and I think that there is a somewhat ununderstandable, but a somewhat knee-jerk reaction to seeing the relationship between a priest and a child, that we want to make it seem more than it is. And to be fair, the book being from Kambili's perspective, it does make it seem like there is a romantic relationship. Kambili obviously does have a crush on Father Amadi, but I do think it's important to remember that this is from the point of view of the person who has a crush, and therefore it would be wrong to think that Father Amadi shares those feelings. There's no evidence that he does. There's nothing like that. I understand why people were confused, because we're used to having more of a third person objective narrator, whereas this is a very subjective narrator. This Kambili, this book is written in first person, and even in books written in first person, we have a tendency to see them as being objective, but that is a mistake. Don't make that mistake. First person narratives are inherently subjective. But I just wanted to make it clear that there never was any chance of a relationship, an inappropriate relationship developing between Kambili and Father Amadi. That was just the hopes of a child, not an actual plot beat. Just so we're clear. So we see Father Amadi and as a repudiation and a replacement for the masculinity to be found in the Okonkwo's and Eugenes of the world, because Father Amadi is a new form of masculinity. Because while Adichie is pushing aside Okonkwo as an old form of masculinity, she is providing Father Amadi to be a new masculinity, one that is compassionate and caring and non-destructive. So this is a section that I'm going to talk about domestic violence at, and if that is an issue for you, I completely understand. I completely, do whatever you need to do for your own mental health. And you can skip to the next section, or you can just end the video right now. I mean, you do you. Whatever is best for you. But we do need to talk about domestic violence, though, because again, it is the major theme in this book. Adichie, in tearing down that form of Okonkwo masculinity, does not hold back. She makes it very clear what her feelings are, and it would be doing her a disservice, and you, as people listening to a video about the book, a disservice to not talk about it. So we are. I used in my research on domestic violence, I used a resource called Women's Advocates, which is a women's shelter in Minnesota. I'll leave a link in the description to their website, and they have a lot of good information about domestic violence and for those seeking help. So if you are in that situation, good resource. Even if you're not in Minnesota, I think you can find a lot of good help there. But they have a list for warning signs of abuse in a relationship. And I just thought it would be useful to go through a few of the signs that are there before we get to the actual physical abuse, which also exists, because there's not always a clear identification that there is physical abuse happening. And it is worth noting that Auntie Ifeoma and Father Amadi don't necessarily know that there is physical abuse happening, even though they are pretty sure that it is an abusive household. But they don't necessarily know, and these are the kinds of things that you might look for. And exist in the book. So, first one, controlling behavior. The person interrogates you intensely, especially if you're late, about whom you talked to and where you were, keeps all the money, insists you ask permission to do anything. We can see this happening when Kambili and her brother go to Auntie Ifeoma's for the first time, and Eugene, noted as Papa in this quote, says, this quote, "Here are your schedules for the week. You will stay in Nasuka," Papa said. The sheet of paper he thrust into my hand was similar to the schedule pasted above my study desk upstairs, except he had penciled in 2 hours of, quote, time with your cousins each day. The only day you are excused from that schedule is when you go to Aukpe with your aunt, Papa said. When he hugged Jaja and then me, his hands were shaking. I have never been without you for more than a day. Now again, on its face, this kind of thing is not necessarily abusive, because it's only a sign. It's a sign of abuse. And in and of itself, on its own, you would not think, oh, that's a bad father. You would think that's a very loving father. But it's the fact that there are other things happening, right? One sign in and of itself, obviously, what is the quote? One swallow does not make a spring. One sign does not make an abusive relationship. But we continue. Another sign from women's advocates is unrealistic expectations. Expects you to be the perfect mate and meet his or her every need, as well as cruelty to animals or children, may expect children to do things that are far beyond their ability and may tease them until they cry. We see this again with Eugene and Kambili. When Kambili is expected to be first in her class every year, every semester, she is expected to graduate or to have the best grades in the class. Not good grades, the best grades. While we see in one passage where she only becomes second. And Eugene drives her to the school and asks, who was it that came in first? Quote, "Where is Chinewe Jireze?" Papa asked. "She is the girl in the middle," I said. "Look at her," Papa said. "How many heads does she have?" "One. I did not need to look at her to know that, but I looked at her anyway. Papa pulled out a small mirror, the size of a powder compact, from his pocket. Look at the mirror. I stared at him. Look in the mirror. I took the mirror, peered at it. How many heads do you have, Gabo? Papa asked, speaking Igbo for the first time. One. The girl has one head too. She does not have two. So why did you let her come first? It will not happen again, Papa. Why do you think I work so hard to give you and Jaja the best? You have to do something with all these privileges. Because God has given you much, he expects much from you. He expects perfection. Again, in a vacuum, a little harsh, but not necessarily an abusive statement. But it is the compounding of the two things together that leads to a larger picture, right? It is all of these things happening in conjunction that leads us to the realization that this is a very abusive relationship. These things, individually, not that bad. And it's worth noting, this is where a lot of abusive people tend to hide. And like, oh, that wasn't abusive. I just love that person very much. But it is all of these things. It is a pattern that we have to look at to see where or when something is abusive. We have to see the pattern. One individual action is not abusive, but a pattern is where we see that abuse. And here we have the three signs together. But it continues. I'm not going to go through every individual sign. There are 15 or so things on this list. Some of them happen, some of them don't. There is no sexual abuse in this. But we do see verbal abuse. He does criticize and talk cruelly. He stops Kambili and Jaja, her brother, from having a relationship with people he does not approve of, such as his non-Christian, Eugene's non-Christian father, their grandfather. He does not allow them to have a relationship with them. He has keys to their bedroom, which they are not allowed to have. He reads their diaries. He does not allow Kambili to wear pants because that is not what women do. He beats his wife into having multiple miscarriages. And eventually we see that not only is he physically abusive with his wife, but he's also physically abusive with Kambili. If you've made it this far, because I just want to make it clear what I'm about to read is very distressing. This is a quote from the book, and it is very distressing. It is not. No longer are we in the realm of talking about hypotheticals. This is it. So, again, if you need to nope out, I understand. But quote, Kambili, Papa's voice carried clearly from upstairs. I held my breath and sat still. Kambili. Nene, go, Mama said. I went upstairs slowly. Papa was in the bathroom with the door ajar. I knocked on the open door and stood by, wondering why he had called me when he was in the bathroom. Come in, he said. He was standing by the tub. Climb into the tub. I stared at Papa. Why was he asking me to climb into the tub? I looked around the bathroom floor. There was no stick anywhere. Maybe he would keep me in the bathroom and then go downstairs, out through the kitchen, to break a stick off one of the trees in the backyard. When Jaja and I were younger, from elementary 2 until about elementary 5, he asked us to get the stick ourselves. We always chose whistling pine because the branches were malleable, not as painful as the stiffer branches of the gamelina or the avocado. And Jaja soaked the sticks in cold water because he said that made them less painful when they landed on your body. The older we got, though, the smaller the branches we brought, until Papa started to go out himself to get the stick. Climb into the tub, Papa said again. I stepped into the tub and stood looking at him. It didn't seem that he was going to get a stick, and I felt fear stinging and raw fill my bladder and my ears. I did not know what he was going to do to me. It was easier when I saw a stick because I could rub my palm together and tighten the muscles of my calves in preparation. He had never asked me to stand inside a tub. Then I noticed a kettle on the floor, close to Papa's feet. The green kettle Cece used to boil hot water for tea and gari, the one that whistled when the water started to boil. Papa picked it up. You knew your grandfather was coming to Nasuka, did you not? He asked in Igbo. Yes, Papa. Did you pick up the phone to inform me of this, Gabo? No. You knew you would be sleeping in the same house as a heathen? Yes, Papa. So you saw the sin clearly and you walked right into it. I nodded. Yes, Papa. Kambili, you are precious. His voice quavered now, like someone speaking at a funeral, choking with emotion. You should strive for perfection. You should not see sin and walk right into it. He lowered the kettle into the tub, tilted it toward my feet. He poured the hot water on my feet slowly, as if he were conducting an experiment and wanted to see what would happen. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face. I saw the moist steam before I saw the water. I watched the water leave the kettle, flowing almost in slow motion in an arc to my feet. The pain of contact was so pure, so scalding, I felt nothing for a second. And then I screamed. That is what you do to yourself when you walk into sin. You burn your feet, he said. I wanted to say yes, Papa, because he was right, but the burning on my feet was climbing up in swift courses of excruciating pain to my head and lips and eyes. Papa was holding me with one hand, wide hand, pouring the water carefully with the other. I did not know that the sobbing voice, I'm sorry, was mine until the water stopped and I realized my mouth was moving and the words were still coming out. Papa put the kettle down, wiped at his eyes. I stood in the scalding tub. I was too scared to move. The skin of my feet would peel off if I tried to step out of the tub. So we see in that quote a few things. Obviously, the physical abuse is there, but we also see a few of the other signs. We obviously the isolation, saying that you're not supposed to be with your grandfather, but we also see blaming others for problems or mistakes, saying that Kambili is the reason that he's abusing her, as well as hypersensitivity and the mood swings, saying that he's doing it for her good. But we can see here, it is so violent. It is so visceral. And the reason that it is that way is because Adichie wants to make it clear. She wants to make it perfectly clear and completely obvious, completely true. She wants to make it perfectly obvious to everybody that the Okonkwo's and the Eugenes of the world are not good people. They are not good men. They are not acceptable. They're not somebody to be looking up to. They are terrible, horrible monsters. And that's the point. That's the point of Purple Hibiscus, is to take that, to take Okonkwo, to take Things Fall Apart, and say, hey, I know this is a great piece of literature. I know that this is something that everybody in Africa reads, and I know it's something that everybody in the world reads when it comes to African literature. But it's not right. It's not. Okonkwo is not somebody to look up to. Okonkwo is somebody to be disparaged. Okonkwo is somebody to be renounced. That isn't to say that Things Fall Apart is a bad book. It's just Adichie wants us to see that there is another side to it, that there is a more complete version of it. And it is a version that I talked about in my video of it. But Adichie takes it further. Much further. And in doing so, creates her own novel, creates her own piece of work, one that acts in conjunction with Things Fall Apart, but on its own is its own piece of art. straight. It's hard to come up with some sort of joke to follow that. I don't think it can. I don't think it would be appropriate to do so anyway. But it's a very good novel. I highly recommend reading it. It's one of the best I've read so far. I don't know. I say that a lot about every novel. Every novel is a great novel. Well, no, because the last one wasn't. The Goblin Emperor, not a good novel, but this one was. Purple Hibiscus was. The next novel will be Americano. Again by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. As we can see, I'm partway through. And the final book by Adichie, and the final final African novel for a long while. It'll be a while till we hit another one. So I look forward to it. Thank you for watching, and leave a comment, subscribe, all that jazz. You know what to do. Stay safe, and keep reading.